Hello again, Dezz Asante from the Tech Muse Academy with another quick tip for you guys today. This one comes courtesy of a question from a mixlessons.com subscriber. It comes from Will McCullum, and he says, "My question is about levels, recording and mixing levels. I think I know that the goal is not to go above 0 dB, but what should my input meter levels be when recording the track? And what should the track levels in the mix be? Obviously, some will be higher than others, but what is too high? What should the output meter level be when I'm ready for mix down? I know that these levels can be subjective and dependent on the sound of the project as a whole, but is there a sweet spot for the output levels, specifically with mastering in mind?" Well, once again, like many things in this arena, there is no hard rule set in stone. But there are some points to consider. And the first thing I'll start with is, to your point that you want to try to get as close to 0 without clipping or peaking. And this is kind of a best practice that came out of the older analog days of technology, where you did want to get your signal on input as close to that 0 dB mark as possible without going over. And the reason for that was to get the signal as high above the noise floor as possible. So the signal to noise ratio, you wanted that to be in your favor. And that's because of the inherent noise that was a part of analog gear, analog circuitry, tape hiss, things of that nature. So that was always the best practice. Get that signal up as high as you can with just enough headroom that you don't risk clipping and overloading the input. Now, in the days of high bit depth digital recording, this is not near as big an issue as it once was. So now you can set your levels very conservatively on input without the risk of like leaving yourself with loads of headroom, so you totally avoid the risk of clipping. And of course, in the digital world, clipping must be avoided at all costs because there's absolutely nothing musical sounding about a digital clip. In the analog domain, you could get a little of that clipping and that and it just sort of added a grit and an aggressiveness to the tone, which may or may not have been appropriate, may not have been what you intended, but at least it was musically usable. In a world of digital, it's not musically usable at all. So you want to definitely avoid clipping. Now, the other thing that is advantageous nowadays is that if you're capturing audio at 24-bit, the headroom dynamically that you have is just ridiculous. It's and especially if you start editing in 32-bit, and that exponentially increases the dynamic range headroom that you have. But I won't get too into the scientific details, but in practice, you can definitely set your input levels very conservatively. You could even be going, half the travel of your meters, aiming for -6 to -12 dB, maybe even softer than that on input. You can always adjust these levels in the mix, of course. That's part of what we do as mixers. We bring the balances back into the track and bring the levels to where they need to be. But on input nowadays, set your levels very conservatively. So that's point number one. Point number two about the levels at the master bus with mastering in mind. And this is another common mistake that I see a lot of newer engineers doing, which is getting that mix on the stereo bus up as loud as possible. And it's an easy pitfall to fall into because we're used to listening to commercial records which have been mastered. We're used to hearing that competitive loudness that seems to be rampant in the industry today. And of course, when we hear our own mixes, we want them to compete. We want them to seem, as close as we can get them to the stuff that we enjoy listening to ourselves. However, if you are going to be sending your track to mastering, which is a great idea, by the way, to get that third-party perspective and to get somebody with great ears and great gear to put the final polish on your track, then you definitely want to leave the mastering engineer with loads of headroom so that he or she can do what they do with a great deal of freedom and not have to worry about not having enough headroom to make a boost or anything like that if they determine that it's needed. Okay, so setting your output levels to peak maximum -6, -10 is is healthy, and that leaves the mastering engineer with a bit of headroom to do the work that they do. Okay, so you can, if you're, to appease yourself, or when you're going to bounce out a rough so that you can study it, on your iPod while going for a jog or going for a drive or whatever, you can quickly throw a limiter or a maximizer on your stereo bus, bring those levels up to sort of competitive areas, and then export that rough mix so that you can check it out, or that you can play it for the client, or what have you, so that they get a sort of quasi-mastered version to evaluate. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But do not forget to remove that plugin and bring those levels back to so that there's some breath and movement, and nothing is squashed, and there's loads of headroom before you send to mastering. A mastering engineer can add compression and limiting. A mastering engineer, no matter how good they are, cannot remove it if that's what you've sent them. Okay, so I hope that helps answer the question. Bottom line is, be conservative with your levels. There's loads of headroom in a 24-bit digital environment. If you're editing and mixing in 32-bit float, even more headroom to speak of, and I don't think you need to worry too much about getting too close to zero at any point in the process. And we'll see you next time.